very brightly colored and it's very loud, and it's fun for a while.
We want to be free to do what we want to do.
Muhammad Ali and Sonny Barker, the president of Hell's Angels.
This is 1095. Hey Thea, welcome to the podcast. How you doing?
Hi Matt, I'm good. Thank you for having me. It's 9 a.m. here, so I'm slowly caffeinating. I think over our conversation, I'll get more and more probably coherent because of coffee. But
okay, well that's cool. I won't be too hard on you. And yeah, it's funny. So you're in the UK. We didn't get to catch up. Obviously, just got back from the UK, which is a shame. You're in London. We're in Bristol, and maybe. I mean, a good starting point, for people that watch the podcast is obviously to explain that we are brother and sister, or half brother and sister. And we've been trying to do a pod for a while. I listened to your podcast, and we're going to do this one today, really in the kind of theme of a project that you've recently put out there as part of your curriculum, which we'll talk about in a minute. But yeah, interesting. I was thinking, obviously a brother and sister. I'm the oldest boy of a family where you are the youngest girl, or oldest and youngest, regardless.
Yeah.
Boy and girl. And I was thinking we've probably spent. How long do you reckon we've spent talking to each other? Probably about as long as this podcast.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. I was thinking actually the other day, like when I remember meeting you in person, and I have this really distinct memory of being a child and you turning up in like a blue convertible. And I don't know if you even had a blue convertible or some car that at the time I was like, that is so cool. Because I was like, I don't know, 4 or 5. But apart from that, that's kind of the prevailing memory I have. Yeah, it's strange having a family where you're like, God, we've never all been in the same room, all of the siblings. So it's an interesting dynamic, definitely.
It is. I can tell you, it definitely wasn't me in the blue convertible because, excuse me, because I left in the UK in 1996. I was 23 and I hadn't learned to drive. So I did my driving test when I got to Australia, and then had a convertible, funnily enough, a few years later. But yeah, it definitely wasn't me. So, but it's funny the way your mind works when you're young.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Maybe there was a body double at some point that was hired. I don't know. Wouldn't
Possibly.
be surprised with our family, yeah.
Oh yeah, interesting family, long line of. It's interesting. I was the first, you were the last, and there won't be any more.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, and I think we won't go too far down the family path, but some interesting experiences, and yeah, I do wonder though how much, with parents and upbringing situation has a big influence on who you are. Obviously, I wonder when I look at what you're doing and your podcasting and your kind of, feminist rhetoric, if that's right, and exploring all these issues, whether a lot of that may have come from your upbringing and our father, and he had a huge influence on me in a very different way, not all positive, but I think as a ricochet from it, all positive. So yeah, I do wonder, and when I see what you're doing, how much it influenced you and the way you kind of view the world, with your podcast, which I've been listening to. So
yeah, well, I definitely think, particularly in you and Emily, I see quite strong similarities, despite the fact that I didn't grow up with either of you. And I think that must be the kind of creative side from our dad coming through, that seems to be kind of beyond nurture, seems to be something quite like natural and instinctive about that, particularly for us. I mean, it's absolutely crazy that we are related and we both have podcasts, and yet we're so different and such an age gap and all of this. Like, that has to be something to do with our dad, surely. So yeah, I definitely attribute a lot to that, and I find that quite nice. I really like this feeling of like finding familial bonds in creativity and being able to be like, this is where this is from, and I have people in my family that also think kind of like this, and yeah, it feels really clarifying. It's a nice thing. It's quite nice for me as like a 22-year-old in London trying to find my feet. It's really nice to know that there are people who are like me that have kind of, I don't know, built their lives on a similar kind of, in a similar way.
Nice. That's good to know. Yeah, I had the same, very much the same things. I remember when we sat down, had a coffee in Bristol. God, it was about 5 years ago, I guess.
Yeah.
And we'd never really, I'd met you as a little girl, like maybe like 2-3 years old. And then we sat down and I could see a real kind of resonating of minds around philosophy and questioning things. And yeah, of course, the podcasting, which for me has been a kind of 4-year journey now, really. And maybe similar for you, but a very different age. And probably a good segue. I mean, if you want to, now we've done the family stuff, do you want to just give us a quick kind of scoop on, your background, what you're doing? We'll talk about the project you just released as part of what you're learning right now. But yeah, just give us the kind of 10,000 foot view on what you're doing in London and learning and what you're putting out there.
Yeah, sure. So during lockdown, so in 2020, I started a podcast, which I always caveat by saying I was going to start it before. It wasn't provoked purely by the lockdown. However, lockdown gave me more time to actually start it. So it was a blessing in disguise for me, at least, which is a massive privilege. And it's called The Last Night Podcast, and it is called that because it's working towards a time where we can look back at our last night of experiencing oppression and work towards a better future. And it was inspired by the conversations that I have with my friends on a daily basis after going on nights out, where we would sit around and kind of anecdotally laugh at basically sexual assault or harassment that happens, on a daily basis to everybody that we know. And the way that we deal with it would be to anecdotalize it, to be like, oh, do you remember that really creepy guy that came up? Ha ha ha, that was funny. And I just got to the point that I was like, actually, I'm fed up of this. It's not funny. It's not something that I should be anecdotalizing. That's not what I want to do. However, I don't have the right coping mechanisms to deal with this because we're taught just to get on with it and to get over it and all of this. And so that's kind of why I started the podcast, because I wanted to create a space that I was like, yeah, no, this isn't okay. This isn't how we should be living as young women in London in now 2022. It's, kind of a bit ridiculous that we're still having these conversations. And so, yeah, that's where it came from. And now it's 2022, so it's been running for nearly 2 years, which is exciting. I took quite a long break recently from it because I'm currently doing a master's in radio, and I just needed some space to do that. Some quite heavy projects within that master's that I've been doing, and I wanted to kind of give myself the space to create that without then also doing my podcast, because I realised just every day I was talking about oppression, and then it's kind of difficult to do that and then walk outside and feel safe and walk outside and kind of switch back to just going to the pub and socialising and all of this. So
yeah,
I guess trying to achieve some kind of balance was what I've been doing. But yeah, I've started it up again really recently. I've been doing some really, really interesting interviews. I interviewed a woman yesterday called Jamie Klingler, who is the founder, or the co-founder, I should say, of Reclaim These Streets. And she tried to organise a vigil for Sarah Everard in 2020 or 2021 maybe. And the Met Police told her that she wasn't allowed because of COVID restrictions, despite the fact that she had created a COVID kind of code that you could scan, like an NHS track and trace check-in. The kind of parameters of this vigil that she was trying to hold were that everybody would be in full PPE, everyone would be socially distanced, and essentially it was women wanting to meet up and grieve together about a woman that had unjustly died at the hands of a policeman. And the Met Police said no. And so Jamie took them to court. She basically sued them, not just her kind of cohort. She got barristers by going on Twitter, which is like the best place to get anything I'm discovering. And they sued the Met and they won.
Oh, wow.
And it's, now being kind of enshrined in legislation. Obviously, and Jamie was like a massive force for why Cressida Dick ended up resigning, because she kind of exposed a lot of the sexism in the police, and actually a lot of it is perpetuated by women because of the lack of jobs for women. So there's none of this like helping people up the ladder. And so just these kind of opportunities to chat to such amazing people, and to be inspired by people, and to realise that actually there are these forces for good, forces for change that are actually trying to make my life better, so that I don't have to go through not, the right to be able to meet up and be socially distanced and mourn somebody. So yeah.
What is your I'll check it out. I'll listen to that. What is your technique for getting to guests like that? Is it easy, or it's
Yeah, it's a lot of networking, I would say. All my friends always kind of take the mick out of me because I really enjoy networking, because it's just essentially meeting loads of people. And as an extrovert, like I just love chatting to people.
it's kind of where we're similar as well. Then I'm kind of known for pretty good networking. So
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah. And yeah, so I reached out to this guy called Robert, he's called Robert Diamond, and he co-hosts the podcast Talk Art with the actor Russell Tovey, and managed to get him on my podcast because he'd listened to it and was like, oh, I really enjoyed it. I feel like I've learned things. Thank you so much. And I was like, oh, come on, please. And through Robert owns a gallery, and so I got to go to some gallery openings. His best friend is like Tracy Emin, and also Russell, so I got to meet them. Also this woman called Deborah Frances White, who is the host of the Guilty Feminist podcast, which was like the whole reason I'm a feminist, and when I was 15, and it was like a massive inspiration for me. And so that was like a full circle moment. Even though in the moment I was like, oh, nice to meet you, being really cool, and so then through Deborah, who came on my podcast, I then got to meet Jamie, who came on Deborah's podcast. So it's just kind of people opening doors for me, really, just through meeting them, and I think being a nice person. Like I genuinely don't think there's much more to it. Obviously, like, caveat that with a massive privilege of like me being in London, having the money to be able to like go to Margate to this gallery opening, like when I like to be able to get a hotel, like all of this. And that's a whole thing that needs to be dealt with, particularly in the media industry, because it's so still like really privileged, I think. However, yeah, that's kind of my experience. And I'm trying to use the privilege that I've gained from that to pass the mic on the podcast to raise up other people's voices, instead of it just being about me, which hopefully I'm doing. But yeah,
I think you do. I mean, I haven't listened to all of them, but I listened to quite a few, and it definitely comes across well. I love the way you've produced it. Excuse me, much better than what I do. I mean, there's a lot more professional production in what you do. Mine's just I think I mean your voice, I love the way you've put in those snippets within little sections where you break it up, which is really nice, a little production in there. So anyway, to your point, it's very much about social circles and who you know. I mean, it certainly does help. So forgetting that though, I really I want us to go in to talk about, I want us to talk about this project, but a master's in radio. That's right. Yeah. I got that.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's obviously very parallel to podcasting. Is it? I mean, what is the kind of path beyond that? Is that what to take you into radio to learn more about this whole mechanism of communication in media, and just that first, and then let's talk about this project and the actual theme around it, because I think it's interesting.
Yeah, so for me, the Masters in Radio was, I'll be honest, I would say 70% of me not wanting to come out of full-time education and being a bit scared to take on the world. So I thought, oh, do a master's, brilliant. Yeah, get myself into more debt. But then also I my degree was English. I didn't enjoy it. In school, I was smart, but I wasn't that passionate about the things that I was doing. Nothing really interested me until I found radio. And I was lucky enough, my mum saved up for me to go to a private school for sixth form. And so they had the money for me to like kind of pursue that, and they converted the the gardener's shed into a radio station for me, and I like set up a radio station,
Cool.
and that's now like continued, and it's super cool. Yeah, it's really exciting. But yeah, and so I got to pursue that. And I've just completely forgot the question that you originally
I was
asked.
just asking what the course was about, really, and because
yes.
you said to me a master's in radio. What does that mean? Is it? I mean,
Yeah.
everything has changed. I'm very old school. When you mention the word radio, I think of growing up in the 90s in the UK and listening to the greatest hits. And, of course, I just come from the UK, and radio is still very big. It's not here, or at least certainly, I don't know a huge amount about Thai radio. But yeah, I was just kind of asking you where that takes you, and does that kind of take you into the podcasting world more professionally, or does it take you into the radio world? What does it mean, that kind of stuff I was asking?
Yeah, and I think like from the reason that I ended up doing this master's was because since I discovered radio in sixth form and started this radio station, that was the thing that I was really passionate about. That was the thing that nothing had really made me that passionate apart from when I was doing acting when I was younger and doing drama. But I had decided that wasn't an industry that I didn't want to go into because I'm competitive in some ways, but not when it comes to like your whole identity and kind of being judged based on like how you look, and it just feels really. I couldn't cope with it personally. Like, massive respect for anyone that can, but I couldn't. And so it was like, the biggest passion I'd felt in ages. And I think throughout my undergraduate degree, I didn't really have that. So I was like, you know what, how cool would it be if I just got to spend a year to study and hone my skills in something that I actually really enjoy? And it's been a really unique experience because I have really enjoyed it. There's elements of the course that I don't enjoy because it's 50% journalism, 50% creative radio. And I'm much more interested in the creative radio bit. But like being in a newsroom environment has been super interesting. All our lecturers and, well, not really lecturers because it's all very like practical, but all of the people that work with us are either still currently or recently have left the BBC, and have like pretty cool contacts. Like my journalism tutor the other day invited us all to a party where like Toby Jones, who played Dobby, was there, and like this other cool actress, and I was like, wow, this is great. Like, they're all like pretty cool people, which has been amazing to see. But I think I've realised coming out of it that I don't really want to just a lot of people on my course really just want an in at the BBC. They would like to just kind of start with whatever, and then end up quite high up at the BBC, and that's not what I want to do. It's not what I've ever wanted to do really, but this year has kind of confirmed that. And I think if anything, it's confirmed that I'm much more interested in the super creative side of radio and how it can be used. And I'm using the term radio loosely. I should say audio. Like these terms, I think, are becoming more and more interchangeable, particularly as radio shows such as like Women's Hour, for example, are also podcasts now, right? Like BBC Sounds are kind of bridging the gap between radio and podcasting. It's becoming something that is much more blurred. And so, yeah, I would like to maybe do a bit more with audio in an artistic sense. I would love to kind of create, because I write a lot of poetry, I'd love to kind of create an audio experience that is based on the poetry that I've written and do it in a gallery for people to kind of walk around and experience, and like have that kind of sensory experience, and to like incorporate smells into that as well would be really interesting. Like just to look at like the really kind of abstract side of audio rather than so. But I don't know, at this point in my life, I'm very, I'm currently producing a series called Rainbow Dads, which is a podcast series about gay dads, and I'm editing that at the moment. And that's because that was offered to me. I'm in the very, very much the stage of accepting any work I can get because I'm 22 and in London and I need to pay my rent and eat food. But yeah, at some point when I have the luxury, I'd love to kind of do a bit more of that. So that explains. I mean, that's why I suppose I was asking the question. The word radio, I mean, audio, whatever. And when I listened to, you sent me this
I don't know whether you'd call it a project or whatever within your course, but I think that, I mean, it was, what would you call that? That's a documentary. I mean, it's like a documentary podcast in a way. I don't know what you, I
Yeah,
can't remember what you labeled it as, but
like an audio documentary, I'd call it.
Audio
Probably.
documentary. So, I mean, let's talk about, I will play it at the end or at the beginning. Maybe I'll do it at the end, but I'll tag it on when I release this. You send it to me, listen to. I found it really fascinating. I loved the way it was constructed. I've always loved documentaries anyway. And, as I was listening, I'm like, there's a very small gap actually between an audio documentary and a video one, really. I mean, because you just make up the pictures in your mind when you listen to these things. And I listen to a lot of podcasts. But maybe just give us the brief on it. I'll play it at the end, and then we'll just talk about how you got into this subject matter. It's pretty, and I understand it's quite topical with some stuff that's happening in the UK, right?
Yeah, sure. So it's a 10-minute documentary, and it's about conversion therapy, which is the practice of attempting at least to convert queer people to being straight, and or trans people to being cisgendered. And so the documentary centres around this girl who is anonymous, who shares her experience of conversion therapy and her experience of corrective rape, which is often seen as part of conversion therapy. It's still kind of, obviously it's illegal, but it's still kind of accepted within those circles as a method of conversion therapy. And she shares her story. She's an incredibly vulnerable individual. I had a lot of ethical questions in my head about sharing her story. This happened to her when she was 15, and she's now 17. So she's a minor. However, because this is something that is still legal in both the UK and the US, I felt that it kind of sharing her vulnerability, particularly when she consented to be part of the documentary, could actually affect more change than not sharing, which is kind of why I came to the conclusion that her voice was super important. And also, who am I to police people's voices if they want to be part of something? And then there's another voice in the documentary, a man called David Virtue. I believe he's changed his name to that. I don't think that that could possibly be his name, really. And he is a minister. And he's, like, to his credit, he's a really lovely guy. He's really nice, which is what kind of confused me making the documentary. I think it's very easy to... for people to be black and white. It's very easy to be like, this is the good side and this is the bad side. And I didn't want to do that in the documentary. I wanted to show the kind of rationale behind his thinking, because he's a really interesting person. He's very smart. But he supports conversion therapy, and he thinks that being gay is not only sinful, but it's a choice, and it can be a choice that can be obviously revoked and changed. And so I include his opinion, not to completely dispel it, but also to show the kind of slightly warped rationale that often gets people into conversion therapy in the first place. And so, yeah, it has his voice in as well.
I was a bit thrown. That's why I was a bit thrown when I was listening, because I think if I'd have been watching this as a documentary, it would have been different, because you'd have got like a label and it would have said, because I listened to this guy and I was like, I thought this was almost an actor playing the kind of antagonist to a situation. It was a weird one. And I was like, is this guy for real? And then as you get into it, but yeah, I mean, many people have heard of conversion therapy. I'd never foreseen it being something that existed in any kind of way in the UK, really, which is what surprised me. I mean, I think in the US, and certainly where you've got, real evangelical style Christianity, and I'm not an expert, but just these are assumptions based on my kind of limited knowledge of, and well, actually, before I say that, I'm making an assumption, but I assume it is a right one, that this exists because of religion pretty much all the time. I can't imagine it really existing outside of that, unless someone is completely old-fashioned and stuck in their ways. But religion tends to create that mold within thinking. So I'm assuming it is very much religiously motivated, right?
Yeah, it is. That's not to say that it doesn't happen outside of religion. The notion of being gay as a choice is something that is becoming less and less to do with religion and more to do with society. However, the perpetuation of that is often within religious circles. So yeah, that's a completely fair assumption.
Have you seen Stephen Fry's documentary on this? It's not on this actually, but it touches on this. I don't know if you've seen any.
No, I
of that.
haven't.
It's on YouTube actually, but it's pretty frightening. I mean, he just kind of goes out, travels around the world to meet everyone who disagrees with his, sexuality where he sits in the world, and has some pretty confronting and awful conversations in some places. But particularly, there is one part. It's a while ago I watched it, but where he's talking to this person is not a minister. It's I suppose you call them some sort of psychologist that specializes in this area and works with the church to carry out this therapy, right? I mean, all of those labels for me are kind of weird labels because don't know how you can call it a therapy, but he sits with this guy and kind of has him rationalizing his situation, which he's quite comfortable with, Stephen's situation. But yeah, it's a pretty weird old process. How did you come across it? What was it? Just a story? And obviously it very much kind of aligns with everything you do on your podcast and your thinking, but yeah, was it one particular case that you came across and wanted to kind of highlight that, or were you looking at it more generally?
I think I can't really remember the first thing. Oh, actually I can. So I met this guy called Harry, who is based in the UK, and he is the co-founder of the organisation Banned Conversion Therapy, who are working with Stonewall and are, a massive force for change. Anyone watching or listening to this, I would massively recommend to check out their website, because they have a really good tool where you can just put in your name and your postcode, and it pops up with a letter to your MP, personalised, all ready to go, and you just press send, and that's it. I received a really interesting reply from my local MP, and I'm going to chat to her more about it, but that's a side note. But yeah, so I met Harry, and he himself is a victim of conversion therapy. He didn't want to talk about it, and interestingly, not really many people in the UK do, because I think conversion therapy in the UK is often much more psychological than it is physically abusive, which is why it's often gotten away with more. There's actually should I say this? Yeah. There's a therapist on Harley Street who kind of conducts backdoor conversion therapy. This is something that I recently discovered. There are a lot of testimonies online about this person. And, if I worked for an organisation who... and this is where it would be good to work for the BBC, because I could do a massive expose on this person. And however, I'm not about to take on someone from Harley Street as a 22-year-old liberal who, doesn't have any money to be sued. So I ended up going to people I went online and I checked out Reddit, which is the best place to find any people who want to talk
with
about
everything.
with everything. And there are so many groups on Reddit, and a lot of them were conversion therapy survivors. What I will say is that people who conduct conversion therapy, people that agree with it, often call it reparative therapy. So if you see that term online as well, that's obviously disputed by anyone that's been through that, because it's not reparative in any sense. So I looked at conversion therapy / reparative therapy groups. And I also came across a group of people who define themselves as ex-gays. And there's a massive group of people who went through conversion therapy and are essentially really glad that they did, and now see being gay as a choice, and seek to convert other people. from being gay, from this like life of sin, to being straight or heterosexual.
I mean, if that didn't exist, then the therapy wouldn't exist. I mean, something cannot progress unless there is some sort of, validation to it. But I do wonder, I mean, I'm no expert in this area, but I do wonder if the pull and the of religion is just for these people is a stronger mechanism for seeing the world than how they've naturally been born. I don't know. I can't. It's almost like people are in a cult, I suppose. I mean, religion for me. I don't know if we've never spoken about religion, but I've had my experience with religion over the years, on and off, and I think really, especially Christianity, is like a massive organized cult. It's bizarre in a way. I mean, cults when they're small are scary, and for some reason they're not when they're absolutely massive. But yeah, I don't know whether it's just the pull of that or the influence of that and the brainwashing of that must just be stronger, and then they can deny certain, natural innate urges within their own personality and own DNA, I suppose. I don't know what you think, but
yeah, definitely. I think that I find it difficult talking about religion because on the one hand, I really don't agree with a lot of things that go down because of religion. However, I have a lot of friends who are Christians, who are very nice people and who have their beliefs, and I respect them for that, and they don't try and push it on me, and we have interesting conversations. And so I'll talk about religion with like a capital R, but with a little r, it's kind of different. Like within communities and stuff, it seems relatively harmless. However, yeah, the thing that I struggle with religion is that I think it feeds on people's vulnerabilities. Often when you hear people's testimonies about how they came to be religious, it will be, oh, I was a drug addict, or oh, I was homeless, and you can see that in that moment of vulnerability, somebody has come in and said, oh, God is there. God is the person, or Allah, or, Jehovah, or whoever. And I think that's where I struggle, because I think no one should ever take advantage of other people's vulnerabilities. And I think that this example of ex-gays is a massive example of this, right? It's like people who already probably had a lot of shame about their sexuality, were already probably brought up in a religious context, and so knew that it was seen as wrong. And so for someone else to feed on that vulnerability and to say, okay, well, if you renounce this part of you, you will be loved kind of indefinitely, then it's kind of understandable that people would reject a massive part of them, particularly, and this is something that David said when I spoke to him, and I didn't include it in the episode because I didn't have enough time. He said that God's wish for human beings is to test them, right? He says that that's a massive part of being a Christian, and so he sees being gay as a huge test.
Okay.
And he sees it as, if you renounce that feeling, if you kind of convert yourself or repair yourself, then you have gotten over that test, and you are like a child of God, essentially. And so I think that if you do that, then all you have left really is God, right? Like all you have left is this notion of something bigger than yourself, because you've denied everything that you identify with. And so it's kind of understandable that a lot of people end up in these communities and try and push this on other people. Not that it's right, but I think I can sympathise with it, because there's a sense of belonging that they wouldn't have had they, and that they probably never felt as a queer person as well.
Yeah, and I think exactly, and I think there's also a pressure around. I mean, I don't know in the UK what religion is like. I have real experience of it in Singapore, actually, when I lived there. I won't go into it because I'll be telling stories for the next half hour, but we'll maybe talk about it another time offline. But Singapore has got like big evangelical churches, and there's huge pressure. I've been in one where I was being asked to pray out loud and all this weird stuff. But
wow.
But yeah, anyway, I think the pressure, family pressure of religion, I just never foresaw it being in the UK like that. But I left 26 years ago, so I suppose I'm kind of out of touch really with the UK. And did you go to church growing up at all? Were you?
Yeah, I think
Were you christened actually?
Yeah, I was christened. I had my first Holy Communion as well.
And what happened when you got to the confirmation? So were you? Can you remember when you were asked whether you want to confirm? Can you remember?
Yes.
For me,
yeah.
I remember it so vividly. And saying no. I was at boarding school. I'm like, no, I don't want to be. I was like, this stuff's rubbish. The stories I was being told about the Bible, and I was just like, I can't grab onto this forever. It doesn't make sense. But can you remember the thought process around, do you want to be confirmed?
Yeah, so I think, so I was brought up a Christian, Christian in kind of a loose sense. Like my mum liked to go into church 80% for the social aspect, to meet people and to kind of, do the teas and biscuits, and then like go home and complain about having to do the teas and biscuits, that kind of vibe. So yeah, I was involved in that. However, like church for me was a weird one because I wrote for the local like church paper for a bit, purely because I really enjoyed writing and it was an opportunity. I did a lot of the readings on Sunday because I really enjoyed speaking in public, and I was in the choir sometimes because I really enjoy singing, and so church for me was like a vehicle to just do some of my hobbies. However, I became this person who was really involved in our local church and was like really known in the church community, and with that comes a lot of pressure because I don't think I ever believed in God, and I felt like I felt really bad because I was like, I'm a fraud, I'm misleading these people. Even though looking back, I wasn't really. I was just kind of finding my feet and I was a child, and also church should be somewhere that's open to anyone. But yeah, so it was really strange, and there was a lot of pressure that came around church because I felt like then I had to be on my top form the whole time. And my mum then hated it because she was Thea's mum. She wasn't because I was going around doing all these things, and she was like, but I'm Nicola, like I've the one that's brought her to church, I'm the one that wants to do things. And like classic me, Rickard vibes, just making it all about me, classic. But like
are those Rickard vibes, are they? No.
Just being like the drama queen, but I think and I never really considered whether I believed in God. It really wasn't a massive part of my church experience. I think a lot of it was just kind of going because that's what was done, that's what we did, that was the Sunday activity. And I really enjoyed it. I had a lot of like friends there. There were a lot of really kind older people who would come up to me and say, oh, I've been praying for you this week. I hope your GCSEs go well. Or, like this support network was really, really nice. And so when it got round to kind of being confirmed in my communion and stuff, I didn't even question it. I didn't even take a minute to think, do I believe in this? Because I don't think I ever viewed it as something that mattered. I never really viewed it as something that had any impact on my life because I didn't believe in it, because I kind of thought the entire system was a bit like, stupid.
Well, how old were you when they asked you that? I mean, because my reflection on it is so many years ago, and quite different because I was really young. I was 13 when they asked me, but it sounds like you were a bit older, I think.
No, I think I was younger. I think I was, when I got confirmed, I must have been like 9 or 10.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, because I kind of drifted from in secondary school, I like had other things on. I was doing school plays and stuff on a Sunday, and didn't have time, which is why I know I was a bit younger. But yeah, that was my experience of it, in that I didn't take any of it as particularly weighty, because I think from the beginning I kind of viewed it as a bit of a sham, a bit kind of, something that didn't really matter, which I think maybe perhaps it was wrong of me to kind of continue going through these rituals to kind of be confirmed when I didn't really believe in it. But that was the community at the time. That's what my friends were doing. So why wouldn't
I think probably a big proportion of the church are people like that. It's more about community than about belief, and that probably exists in and birth, where you're born, and how who's around you when you're born. So it kind of, yeah, I think a lot of religion is like that generally. So
Yeah.
cool. So, I mean, what that documentary project is in isolation, is it? You're going to extend on that, or that's just one and now you go on to the next thing, or?
I think I'm going to try and extend on it. I've had a lot of emails and messages from people who would also like to talk about their story. And I'd love to facilitate that. I'd love to kind of give people the space to do that. It was something that was really difficult to work on. I'm bisexual, and so to kind of work on that on a daily basis was really horrible, because I had to listen to somebody basically saying that I either don't exist, or that I am sinful, or it's like not a nice feeling. And so I think I'd have to really think about whether I want to put myself through that again, purely because, when I was editing, I would be listening to phrases over and over again in order to get the sound right, but it would be like, gay people are horrible, or like, all of that. And it does sink in, it does make you feel pretty awful. And so, yeah, I think I will give it, take a beat with it, give it a bit, and come back to it, because I think it is an important project. I think I want to see what I can do on the legal side for the moment. I think that, the day that my documentary was released, the UK government announced that they were dropping the bill that was going to ban conversion therapy. And there was such uproar that they brought it back. However, they dropped the clause that said that conversion therapy for trans people would be illegal. And so they're essentially saying that the LGB is, it's illegal, but the T, it's not. And so I would need to work on that. I need to kind of basically do some activism now. I think I've spoken about it for a couple of months now. I need to do something about it. I need to figure out how I can actually try and make legislative change, because, awareness isn't enough. You have to act on it as well. And yeah, I'm feeling a really strong pull towards that at the moment, because I think a lot of people have a misconception that, it's 2022, we're accepting of gay people, we are, a progressive society, but we're really not. There's a reason that the news cares more about Ukraine than it does about Syria or Yemen or Afghanistan. It's because these people are white, and it's, things like this that are still so sort of prevalent, I guess, in our society, this like implicit racism and homophobia that still, needs to be changed.
It's really interesting, and I don't want to go into it now. Actually, it's kind of we'll kind of draw to a close, but there's a bunch of stuff you said there, and I'd love to do another podcast at some point where it's not just about this project, but when we unwrap all of that stuff, because I think you and I will have very differing, contrary views on this, which are healthy on a podcast to discuss. And when you talk about, when I just think, and I won't, again, this is a bit of a rabbit hole, but I think just to touch on it, when I think back, this is obviously anecdotal, but my experience of life, and I think back to the 90s and the perception of someone being gay and what that meant. And I mean, really, it was so different to now. Like, I'm talking like so dramatically different. And then I think of like, a good friend in Australia who I was speaking to the other day, Marty, who was the big kind of womanizer in the office, who then came out of the closet because he felt he could. And this was in around 2000. And, he's now running a gay club in China, of all places. And, I'd love to chat to you about this stuff, because I wonder whether, the way people look at the world now, you're right. There's always more that can be done. But when I look at where we were and the difference, I feel is huge. And I think there's a lot of data to back that up. And I think some of the stuff is maybe different reasoning now, and, why the news reports on this. And anyway, there's loads in there, right? But I'd love us to do a podcast on and chat through some of the, maybe chat through things like, what is privilege, what is racism? What is homophobia? You know, what are these things, and what is the current situation with them, and has it changed? I mean, we've probably chat for about 5 hours. We'll have to have a couple of bottles of wine or something. But
yeah. No, I'd love to do that. It's something that I think is super important. And as a white woman, I think that, like, I'm a white middle class woman, and it should be people like me that are advocating for people that don't have the same privilege to have the time or the like money to attend good unis, to get educated, you know, all of that. What I would quickly respond to the thing about times changing, I think that's a really important thing. We are massively progressing, right? It's being gay means something different. But I think as soon as you're like, oh, but things were so much worse, then you don't leave space for things to get better. And so I think for me, it's recognizing that I am extremely privileged to just be in the position that I am in this day and age rather than 10, 20 years ago. However, you know, I still do have friends that are followed home for being gay. I still do have friends that receive kind of homophobic attacks that are, you know, and this is something that's rising in, weirdly not in London, well, it is rising in London, but it's rising more in places like Birmingham, Manchester, Bristol. More and more people are coming forward to say that they were physically beaten up for being gay. And so I think it's interesting to look at post-lockdown, whether there's like a lack of tolerance that potentially wasn't there before. And this is something that I need to do research on.
Yeah, I mean, the lockdown, yeah, I got to think there's so many things that it may have changed in terms of attitudes and temperaments and all sorts of things. And I mean, as you're talking there, and I realize as well, there's so much nuance in these conversations because, you know, if I was to tell you, I'm in Thailand, right? I mean, the way things here operate completely different. And of course, you're, you know, I would imagine predominantly looking through a UK lens, and I mean, geographically, how all of this stuff is viewed is so different around the world. It's incredible, but we're all connected now through the internet, so we all, you know, mostly have access to the same information, which I think is long term such an important thing, you know.
100%. The internet can be such a vehicle for change. It can be great. I think Instagram is such a great place for kind of spreading awareness, for getting things out there. I think you can't just rely on Instagram. I think people fool when they think that Instagram or Twitter or, you know, Facebook or whatever is the be all and end all. Like, it has to be more than that. But I think it is really good. But obviously there's a lot of hate on there. I get a lot of messages from men being like, shut up, you're really annoying. And I'm like, oh, I'm just talking about the patriarchy, sorry. Well, I obviously don't say sorry. I reply with a really characteristically annoying paragraph telling them about the inequalities implicit in society and why their position of power needs to be used to good. They don't love it, you know, but there we go. That's
of course, that's also something I never grew up with was kind of verbal online abuse. It just didn't, we didn't have laptops, we didn't have the internet, but we all do now, of course. So anyway, look, thanks for joining. And I mean, great to really enjoyed your you know, audio documentary, and please keep me, I will play it now for anyone that wants to listen. And I'll include your other links. What do you want to share? I'll include the Last Night podcast link in the notes, but you know, anywhere else people can kind of find out about you, follow you, that you'd like to give out.
Yeah, brilliant. My personal Instagram is Thea Rickard. Give me a follow. Always plugging for followers on there. And then the Last Night podcast, that's the name of our Instagram page. We have a website, www.thelastnightpodcast.com. On that is a journalistic platform, which is I'm really enjoying doing that. There's a lot of people that are writing for us at the moment. Where else? Twitter, Thea Rickard, and the Last Night podcast, LinkedIn, the same. So basically anywhere you look, it's just Thea Rickard or the Last Night podcast.
Awesome. Well, look, have a good day. I hope the coffee's kicked in, and it's good to add another hour to the probably 3 hours that we chatted in a lifetime. So families are weird, and we're definitely a weird one, but we're clearly going to talk for many years into the future there. So all the best. Take care. And
you too. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. We've taken a while to do this, so I'm glad we now have.
Yeah, and I'm excited for the next one.
Awesome. Same as.
Great.
See you later.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
We want to be free to do what we want to
Two are
do.
Muhammad Ali and Sonny Barker, the president of the Hells Angels.
This is 1095